Hello. This yin yoga practice focuses on the 6 degrees of freedom of the spine. That is the directions of movement that the spine can make. So the yin yoga postures will consist of a forward bend, which will be butterfly pose, a back bend, which is a supported bridge pose. You'll need a prop for that. So a couple of blocks, a stack of books or bolster, or maybe a stack of blankets. And then we'll practice banana pose, which is lateral bends, and then supine twists, which is twisting the spine. While I'm residing in my postures, I'll talk a little bit about some of the general characteristics of the human spine. So we'll get started in a comfortable seat, somewhere where your torso is free to move and to breathe. I'm going to sit cross-legged, and if you're sitting on the floor, sitting cross-legged, you can always sit up on a little bit of height if that makes things a little bit more accessible for you. I've got a couple of blankets here just to use for other things, and I might as well sit on them. So find, again, wiggle around to find something that feels stable, that you can reside in. We'll start the practice with a little bit of breathing. So you want to feel stable in your seat. If you're not feeling stable, then that's what the wiggling is for, is to find something that does feel stable. So you're rooted down through your lower body. Create a nice neutral spine. Maybe your crown of your head points up towards the ceiling, the chin kind of tucks a little bit, and you reach your ears over your shoulders here. And maybe just roll your shoulders a little bit to help loosen up and roll back your shoulders. Take some nice normal deep breaths where you're not really changing much, and then begin to deepen the breath. And when I say deepen, I mean you're slowly lengthening the duration of each inhale and exhale, not to a point of strain, but something that's a little bit longer than normal, something that you could maintain all day long if you could pay attention to it here. And then use that anchor to draw your attention into the present moment and into your practice, into your body. You can use the breath to kind of postpone the issues that are going on around you, and set as highest priority this moment, this practice. Since I'm going to be talking about the spine today, I'll go through a mental visualization during the breath work that I call it just spinal awareness. So as you're slowing your breath down, and I don't really care how slow you go here, you're finding that cadence here. What you might want to try is to just bring some awareness to the back of your spine, since that's kind of the focus of today's practice. So begin the focus at your tailbone, so the very bottom of your torso. Visualize your tailbone. Maybe you can't even visualize it, but kind of think of where might be your tailbone there, and draw your attention there. After your next exhale, when you inhale, as you slowly inhale, draw your awareness up the back side of your spine from the tip of your tailbone until at the very end of your inhale, you reach the crown of your head. So the crown of your head is considered the top of your spine. The skull is actually considered the top bone of the spine. And then as you exhale and reverse the visualization. Allow your mind's eye to draw your attention slowly down so that at the very end of the exhale you reach your tailbone again. And that's the visualization. So as you breathe, every inhale, you slowly move your awareness up the back. So you're trying to feel the back of your spine here. And then as you exhale, it goes back down. Maybe something that might help this visualization is if you're taking like 2 fingers, if you could reach back there and you're taking 2 fingers and you're very lightly starting at your tailbone and kind of just running very lightly those 2 fingers all the way up your spine to the very crown of your head, and then running them all the way back down so that you can actually feel the bones, you can feel the bumps of the spinal process of the vertebrae as you're running the fingers up and down the back of the spine here. Although this is more of a mental practice here. So I'll leave you alone for 2 or 3 more of these cycles here. And then whenever you want to, you can drop the visualization, drop the deeper breathing, and just come back to a normal breath. We'll do a little bit of a warm-up before we get into the first yin posture. Let's try a warm-up twist. If you want to, you can either stay seated where you are, or you can change your seat. So I'm going to suggest come and sit with knees together back on your heels. Now for some of us, this is not possible, so maybe just go back to how you were seated. But if this is okay, maybe change to this seat now. And then interlace your fingers in front of your torso. Turn your palms to face out. Extend your arms out in front of you. And then extend your arms up overhead. And then visualize yourself trying to grow your spine very, very long here. And you do that by just reaching your arms up towards the ceiling. So you're starting from your tailbone again, the base of your torso, reaching your torso up and then reaching your arms up and pressing through the bottoms of your hands here. Maybe do this, maybe 1 more breath here. And then release your fingers. Extend your arms out to either side at shoulder height. And then very gently begin to twist your torso over to the right and lower your arms down to the ground. Maybe the left arm just rests on your right thigh, right hand rests behind you. Again, on an inhale, grow your spine long, exhale, and twist here. And then bring your arms up, bring yourself back to center, twist to the other side. So arms twist, lower your arms down, and then a couple breaths here. So on the inhale, you're feeling your torso, you're expanding. On your exhale, you're twisting here. And then bring yourself back to neutral. If you're feeling a little bit kinked, maybe a gentle counter twist to the other side again. Come back forward and we'll set up for the first yin posture. So the first yin posture is a forward bend known as butterfly. So you'll come to seated, legs out in front. And I have the blanket set up here strategically so I can sit up on the blankets. And it might be nice to sit up on a little bit of height here. If you have an extreme range of motion, maybe you don't need height, although I would recommend a little bit of height no matter what your range of motion is. Bend your knees and allow them to lower to either side. Bring the bottoms of your feet together, and this kind of looks like bound angle pose, but you can keep the heels pretty far away from your hips here. If the knees are achy, you can always take some sort of prop to place under the achy knee. Maybe this knee is achy today. So you can place something underneath that leg to support, to give that knee a little bit of a break here. Because today's all about the spine. This practice is all about the spine. And so the forward fold, this is a light hip opener, but it's the forward fold that we're really kind of interested in. So start with a nice, normal, neutral torso, and then begin to fold forward. Start the fold from the hip sockets, and the hip sockets are clear down here in the legs, and then when that's done, relax the rest of your torso. Let it round here. So we're flexing the spine. This is one of the degrees of motion of the spine, is to flex it in a forward fold. You just go as far as you go to where you stop. Now this is a yin yoga practice, so we're staying here for a few minutes. You can put as much support underneath your head or your torso as you need to. If it doesn't feel appropriate to just let it hang in midair. So I'm just letting myself hang in midair, but you might want to do something else. You might want to put some blocks. You can even get a chair and set the chair in front of you, or you can even get up next to a bed and just rest your head on the side of the bed too. Those are all different ways to do this pose, but your spine is in flexion here. And this is, like I said, one of the degrees of motion, and we're trying to relax the muscles. This is why the spine is rounding and flexing here, and just we're allowing gravity and time to put pressure, put traction, put a light amount of healthy stress on the connective tissues that surround the vertebra in the spinal column. So a couple more minutes here in butterfly, but you can come out, a reminder, you can come out of a pose whenever you want to. I'm going to try to stay here for probably 3.5, 4 minutes or so. But if you're done after 2 minutes, come out. This reminds me to remind you of the 3 principles of this practice. First principle is called finding your edge. Now, since we're all different, and I'll maybe get to this when I talk about the spine, since we are all built differently, our edge will all be different. And that means we will look different in our postures. We will stay for different amounts of time in our postures. We'll need or not need different props in our postures. We need to figure all of this out in the experiment and the investigation of our yoga practice here. This is all part of finding our edge, and we need to find the place where we stop. Each one of us stops here. That's the place where we start feeling pressure, but it's not the place where we're injuring ourselves. Second principle is called stillness. Once we've discovered that stopping point for us, then we allow ourselves to be still. This is challenging because it requires patience. And patience can be a hard virtue to come up with here. The final one is time. Time is what brings us the benefits of this kind of practice. Time is what makes yin yoga yin, is the long residing of the postures, to let the traction sink into the connective tissue, but also to allow for the little mini meditation session here. You're still, you're quiet. You're letting it be okay to not have to go anywhere and do anything. You're just watching, metaphorically speaking. You're watching your inner landscape to make sure you're safe and to make sure you're at your edge and to make an adjustment if you need to make an adjustment. Right now, we have about 5 more breaths here in butterfly. If you're feeling pain, it's not appropriate to stay here. You come out of the posture. If you're not feeling anything, that's maybe not appropriate either. You allow yourself to go sink a little bit deeper, relax the muscles again. And that brings you back on into your body, onto your mat, into your breath to reestablish a new edge. And then just reside here. So about 3 more breaths here in butterfly. And then when you're ready, you'll plant your hands, slowly bring yourself up. Bring your spine back to neutral. So what that's going to feel like is you're growing the spine. You're not really growing anything. What you're doing is you're engaging your muscles to return your spine back to its most stable position here. In yoga we call it growing or lengthening. That's a metaphor. Your spine doesn't really lengthen. But when you bring it back to a neutral position like you do after forward fold like that, it feels like the spine is getting longer here. You can do some counter poses to work out the kinks after that long hold. Maybe some gentle twists. Maybe that hip opener got a little bit achy, so you can extend the legs and point and flex the feet a few times here. We'll do some counter poses before we get into the back bend. And so make your way gently onto hands and knees. Come into a table pose, so a tabletop position. And then from here, as you might have guessed, we'll go ahead and do a few rounds of cat and cow here. Let's start with cow pose, since we just got done with a forward fold. So sink the belly down, kind of move your chest forward, tuck your tailbone to point up towards, raise your tailbone to point up towards the ceiling. Make a nice back bend here in cow pose here. And then slowly move all the way up into a nice back bend into cat. And then maybe 3 more rounds of this at your own pace. Moving into cow and then into cat. You can sync your breath with this if you wish. And just notice if there's any kind of reverberation from that long forward fold that we just finished with. Now, before we move into the yin posture, I'd like to do an upper body back bend here, since the yin posture has mainly to do with the lower spine. So we'll try puppy pose for just a few breaths here. So for puppy pose, walk your hands forward, melt your heart to the floor. Maybe move your hands out to the side a little bit farther apart, and then allow your head, your neck, your torso to melt in between your shoulders here, so that you really feel the pressure in your shoulders and your upper back. If it's okay with your head and your neck, maybe look forward. Now, if that's too painful on your neck, then look down and just rest your forehead on the ground. Some of you might be able to rest your chin on the ground, but you're going to have to listen to your neck and see what your neck has to say about that. And then allow everything to soften and settle, just so that you can feel the traction in the upper torso. Maybe it's in the upper spine, maybe it's in the shoulders, maybe it's across the front of the chest here. So you're just noticing where that is. And we're not staying here for yin time, just maybe one more breath here. And then plant your hands and press yourself back up, come back to tabletop. And now we'll set up for this supported bridge pose. I've renamed this posture, so I refer to it as Milky Way Pose, because you're making a gentle arch like the Milky Way does across a very, very dark and clear sky here. So this is where I'll use a couple of yoga blocks. You can use a bolster, you can use books, but I'll demonstrate with these blocks here. So you make your way onto your back. Bend your knees, put your feet on the floor. So now you're going to raise your hips up to place some height underneath your hips here. If you have yoga blocks, I'd like to use 2, because 2 are more stable than 1. You raise your hips up and then place the yoga blocks underneath your pelvic bone. So the pelvic bone is slightly above the glutes and slightly below the lumbar spine. It's that very flat and stable feeling part of the back, of the low back. And that's why you put them there, so that they feel stable there. I've got these on the high setting. This might be too high for a lot of people. So remember, you've got the medium setting and you have the low setting on the blocks. I'm going to stay with the exaggeration here, just so that it probably looks really clear what I'm doing, but you don't have to go up this high if this creates pain. So this is part of finding your edge, is finding the right height here to place these blocks here. And then you can keep your legs bent if this is already generating a lot of sensation, or extend your legs forward to create tension along the fascial tissues in the muscles that run along the fronts of the torso. But we're also in a back bend here. So we're getting into the mid spine and the low spine here on the other side of the torso. Incidentally, if this is creating too much pain, An alternative is Sphinx pose. And for Sphinx pose, you can make your way onto your belly. And bring your elbows underneath your torso. So this is a slightly different kind of a back bend, but maybe this is more accessible, maybe this feels better. The idea is the back bend. This is the next degree of freedom of the spine. And so this can be a nice alternative. If Milky Way pose is not quite feeling right today. Otherwise, I'll move back into Milky Way pose. Here. Now I've got the blocks in kind of an inverted V here. You can use one block if that feels stable. This feels more stable to me, this use of 2 blocks. And then we'll stay here for about 4 minutes. So the idea is to find a space where you can really relax everything and just reside here for a while. So if your height is too high and you think you can only stay here for a minute, maybe decrease the height so that you can stay longer here. If you're using books, take out one of the books here. So as that said, I touch on the general properties of the human spine, and you'll notice that in the background here is a medical grade skeleton or assemblage of human bones. And it's really too far away from the camera to see the details. But most of us have spent time in a medical office where there's probably a skeleton hanging around. And if you're just waiting for the doctor or the nurse to show up, you can take a closer look at the spine and at the shape of the vertebra in the spine. So the human spine has curves in it. And it's made up, it's categorized into 4 sections. So maybe I'll explain the 4 sections first here. I'll start from the bottom and work my way up. The first section is called the sacral complex. And this comprises the sacrum and the tailbone. So depending on what anatomist you talk to, they would definitely say the tailbone is something different than the sacrum. But we'll just call the tailbone and the sacrum. The sacrum is the fused part of the vertebra that are in between the 2 flared hip bones, the ilia here. And so that's the sacral region or the sacrum region of the spine. And then you go above that and there's the lumbar spine. So the lumbar spine is this spine in our waist here, kind of around where our navel is. And it's the forward bend and back bendy part of the spine. So in this posture, we've probably got the lumbar as extended as it can extend here. And then above the lumbar, so the lumbar is the spine between the sacrum and the part of the spine that has the ribs coming out of it. Now, as soon as ribs start coming out of it, that is known as the thoracic spine. So that's the third section of the spine. So the upper torso, thoracic spine. By the way, we have about a little more than a minute to spend here. If you've spent enough time here, you can come out. And then above the thoracic spine, don't forget, is the neck. So there's vertebra running up through the neck. And that's known as the cervical spine. So that's the 4 parts that anatomists tend to categorize the spine in. The sacrum, the lumbar, the thoracic spine, the upper spine, and the neck. And the skull is considered part of the spine too, but for argument's sake today, I'm going to leave out the skull because the skull can talk about the skull in its own class, even though it's in its own kind of special space here. We'll talk about the rest of the spine. So about 5 more breaths here. Now these 4 sections create one long line, but it's not straight. This is interesting. So the human spine actually has curves in it. it has a primary curves and secondary curves here. So the primary curves are the curves that you find in the thoracic spine. This great primary curve, and then the sacrum also is kind of a bit of a primary curve. They curve one way. And then the secondary curves are found in the lumbar spine and in the cervical spine. Those curves are important. So those are designed into our bodies because we are human. In fact, those curves are basically one of the very things that define us as human beings. Maybe we think it's our big giant brains, but it's also the curves in our spine. There's a reason they're there. We have to start thinking about coming out of this posture here. So when you're ready to come out of this, if your legs are straight, maybe slowly begin to bend one leg at a time. Put your feet on the floor and then press through your shoulders and your feet to lift up your hips high enough so that you can take your hands and start taking out the props. And then when the props have been removed, slowly, with control, with engaged muscles, slowly lower your torso down to the ground. Ooh. And you might feel a little bit of reverberation from all of that. So a nice thing to do is to keep your knees bent, slowly draw your knees into your torso as far as they go until they don't go anymore. And then start making gentle, slow knee circles. Go one way with both knees together. And then switch up, go the other way with the knees together for a while. And just kind of do this for a few breaths, just to kind of work out the reverberation from that back bend. So that was the second degree here. From here, we'll move into banana pose. So banana pose is a full body lateral bend. So now we're getting the lateral bend of the spine here. So extend your legs out long. Now if you have a weight, like a sandbag, that can be handy, although you can do banana pose without a weight. I have a sandbag here, so I'll go ahead and demonstrate it, but if you don't have the sandbag, you can just do banana pose without the sandbag here. So the idea to banana pose is to make a lateral bend rather than a forward bend or a back bend here. And that's why I like using the sandbag. So I try to keep my hips cemented to the floor. And I do that by taking the sandbag, placing it over my hips, just to remind them to stay. This time I'm putting it on the left side of my hip because I'm moving over to the right. So I take my extended legs, start inching them over to the right side until they're stuck. You just don't go anymore. And then I inch my torso over to the right. So I'm making a crescent moon shape here until I can't go anymore here. And I'm trying to keep the left hip down so that I'm opening up through the left hip and I'm creating a gentle lateral bend through my spine here. And arms can just be down at your side. They can extend up overhead. Maybe you can stretch that left arm and that left shoulder. If you want your neck in on the lateral bend, then maybe turn your head slowly towards the right and kind of lean your head to the right, but only if that makes your neck feel good here. Again, we'll stay here for a few minutes on this side. And you can do other experiments. You can cross your legs, cross your heels, and see how that feels here. Maybe there's nerve pinching up in your arms, so you have to move your arms into a different location. Maybe your head is uncomfortably kinked, so just put your head in a different position. But here I've got my spine in a gentle lateral bend over to the right here. So this is the third degree of freedom, the third direction of motion of the spine. And we just stay here for a few more minutes or so. So it turns out, since we humans walk upright and in order for our spine to bear weight in an upright position, it has engineered curves in it to absorb weight so that we can walk upright. The spine can absorb the weight of our own body, plus maybe some extra weight if we're carrying something, say like a small human in our arms. So we need that spine because we walk upright. And we're one of the only mammal species that actually walks upright, which means we're one of the few mammal species that has curves in our spines to compensate for walking upright. That's why we have curves in our spines, because we walk on 2 feet instead of 4. Almost all other mammals have a straight spine, and because it's straight, they cannot bear weight for very long in upright position. Most mammals can stand on 2 feet, but it takes a great amount of effort and strain for them to do so. Even primates, even gorillas and monkeys, when they stand on 2 feet, it takes a huge amount of effort and they get tired and overstrained by doing it, so they have to rest. We're built to stand because of the shape of our spine. That's why it has curves in it. And so a neutral spine has these primary and secondary curves in it. Now, since we're all different, the curves in each one of the amount of curvature in our spine is different. Some of us have a lot of curvature in our spine. Some of us have almost none. And it's just a normal part of human variation, how much curve we have. So some of us have a lot of curve in our upper spine, in our thoracic spine. That's called kyphosis. Just another 5 breaths here on this side of banana pose. If you have a lot of extension curve, secondary curve in your lumbar spine, that's called lordosis. This is not a good or a bad thing. This is just the term that anatomists and medical professionals use to describe the amount of curve. And it's like, oh, you have a lot of curve in your upper spine. You have a lot of kyphosis. Or, oh, you have a lot of curve in your lumbar spine. You have a lot of lordosis. They're just labels. They're just terms. But they do describe the extent of how much curvature is there. So our spine, one of the jobs of our spine is to bear weight and to create stability throughout the rest of the skeleton. Stability is one of the, we're practicing moving the spine here, exercising its range of motion. But the spine is meant to move, but it's also meant to stabilize. And it's most stable in its neutral position. So not in these yin positions that we're holding. We can come out of this side of banana pose. So make your way back to center slowly. If you're using a weight, maybe take the weight off for a while. Maybe the same counter pose this time. So bend your knees, draw your knees into your chest. You can give your knees a hug, or you can do the knee circles again. If you want to do the knee circles, it's up to you. Maybe there's some other things you want to do. Maybe you want to do waterfall here and point flex the toes a few times. We do have the other side of banana pose to do, so we'll get to it. So extend your legs out long here again. This side, we're going to the other side. So if you have the weight, place the weight on the other side of your hip. Inch your legs over to the left side. Inch your torso over to the left side. Take your time, and then when you find your edge, find that stopping point, then this is where you stay on this side. Soften, settle, get in touch with your breath. Notice your sensations. This is the important part of practice, is to get in touch with your internal landscape. And then give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to just hang out here. So in yin yoga, we're actually trying to find the simplest postures possible where we can safely bring our spine to its end range of motion. Hang out there for a while. Let the bones, the connective tissue that surround the bones, absorbs some of the stress, the pressure of the posture, so that it can be invigorated to become healthier and to be able to maintain some pressure there. But when you really need the spine to stabilize the body, you need to bring it back to its neutral position. So neither forward bends, nor back bends, nor lateral bends, nor twists, but in its neutral position. And in its neutral position, it has curves in it. So what you'll often hear in a yoga class are cues that are meant to bring your spine back to neutral because you need to stabilize it for some sort of powerful muscular move. Oftentimes the cueing of that is a little bit interesting. So and I use it too. Its cue is like straighten your spine and lengthen your spine. The trouble is your neutral spine is not straight. It has curves in it. And a lengthened spine has curves in it. It just feels like it's lengthened. So these are energetic cues that are not asking you to actually lengthen the spine or to straighten the spine, but to bring the spine back to its neutral position, to its normal, natural, neutral position, which incidentally will be slightly different for each one of us because each one of us has different degrees of curves in our spine. It's that place that really does feel neutral. And for us, that's the neutral position. And that's where we'll stay for a while. We've got about a couple more minutes here to stay in this side of banana pose here. So an anecdote about the curves of the spine. Turns out contortionists, the people who can bend their spine the deepest, tend to have very straight spines. So they've actually x-rayed the spines of contortionists to see how much curve they have in them. And maybe our knee-jerk reaction would think, well, they must have incredible curves in their spine. Turns out contortionists have very little curvature in their neutral spine at all. And they're the ones that have a pretty much exactly straight, they're the closest to having no curves in their spine. And it turns out that's to their advantage. When they go away from neutral, they can create, depending on the other characteristics of their spine, they can create very, very deep back bends or forward bends or twists or whatever they need to do their contortions here. The disadvantage to having a very straight spine is if you don't have those engineered curves to absorb weight, you can't bear a lot of weight. So these contortionists really need to get jobs as contortionists. If they get jobs, say working at a dock or doing manual labor where they have to lift heavy weights all day long, they don't have the natural curves in the spine to absorb that weight, and they'll probably start having serious back issues. So they're better off in some sort of performing arts scenario where they can show off their skill and their talent for body bending and for creating extravagant shapes here. We're done with this extravagant shape here, so come bring your spine slowly back to neutral. Here, release banana pose. Again, you use the weight, you can take the weight off. Once again, a little bit of rest before we move into the next posture. So your kind of counter pose that you would like to do, maybe waterfall, maybe knees into chest again, maybe the knee rolling thing, maybe reclined windshield wipers here, just for a little bit of a hip exercise. But we're moving into the supine twist next. So when you're ready, this will be done on the back too. Bend your knees, draw your knees into your chest, maybe give them a hug, kind of release the knees a little bit, and now we're moving into the spine into a twist. So slowly lower the knees over to the right side. You might have to scooch your hips back an inch or two to make stacking the hips a little bit more accessible. Maybe you don't have to do that. Knees might make it to the floor, maybe they float. If they're floating and they don't feel very good floating, this is where you grab a prop. Put a prop underneath the knees. The left shoulder is trying to melt back towards the ground. And this is so that we know that we have the spine in a spinal twist. Otherwise, if you're laying on your side like this, your spine is back to neutral, and we're actually trying to twist the spine. So upper body's trying to reach back. Knees are trying to go right. Left shoulder's trying to go left. And then we know we're in a back bend here. And then you can experiment with what to do with this left arm. You can go out to the left T or cactus arm position. You can experiment. I get a deep stretch in the shoulders if I move my arm clear up here. But maybe for this sake, let me anywhere here. Incidentally, if you want a complete twist in the spine, then you turn your head to the left to get a twist up in the cervical spine, in the neck here. But if that creates too much pain in the neck, then just keep your head and neck neutral here. And just let the twist soak in the upper and the middle spine here, the thoracic and the lumbar spine here. And then we'll stay here a few minutes. So I would really encourage you, if you get a chance, to look at the three-dimensional shape of the spine on a medical grade skeleton. Do so. Look at the detailed shape of each vertebra that runs down the spine, and you'll notice that the tiny little details of the shape of each vertebra change as they run down the spine. And this is what makes different motions accessible in different parts of the spine. So right now we're practicing a twist, this simple supine twist on the floor here. Turns out that most people can twist we get most of our twist, the main trunk of our spine, we get the twist from our upper spine, from our thoracic spine. And we can't twist very much in the lumbar spine. If you actually look at the faucet joints, which is the shape of the vertebra on the back of the spine, as it runs down, you'll notice why. The faucet joints are built in such a way that they don't allow a lot of twisting motion in the vertebra in the lumbar spine. But as you move up into the thoracic spine, the shape of the joints, the connection points between vertebrae change to a point that allows more twisting motion. That's why we can twist in the upper body more than we can twist in the lower body. And again, the skeleton I have in the back is too far away from the camera for you to actually see those little tiny details. You really need to get up close, like a few inches from the vertebra, and really study them in detail to notice that, yeah, the shape actually changes. This is how they get defined as certain types of vertebra. The lumbar don't have any ribs coming out of them, and the shape of their faucet joints make them conducive to forward and back bending, but not to twisting. The vertebra in our upper spine, in our thoracic spine, we can't bend forward or back, so they don't allow much motion, at least not back bending. They allow some motion forward bending, but they pretty much start getting hung up on each other when you back bend, so you can't back bend very far in the upper back. But you can twist. They can slide in a twisting motion in the upper spine. This is kind of on average here. So 3 or 4 more breaths here in this twist, if it's appropriate. If it's feeling like pain, it's not appropriate, it's time to come out. Otherwise, check in with your breath. And then when you're ready to come out, maybe take your hands, use your hands to bring your knees back up to center. And then once again, you can just reside here and rest. Maybe feet come out wide, knees fall together. Or maybe reclined windshield wipers. Or maybe knees into chest. Or maybe just Shavasana here for a few breaths. Before we go into the final twist, but might as well get set up for the final twist. So, knees come in. Maybe you have to shift your hips over to the right, maybe you don't. And then lower your knees over to the left side. Right arm comes up to the right as an outrigger to kind of encourage the right shoulder on the ground. This, again, I'm trying to make sure I feel that my spine is in a twist here. And then if you want a twist in your cervical spine, maybe look over that right down that right arm here. And then we stay here. A few more minutes here in this twist. So there's a typical number of thoracic vertebra, typical number of lumbar vertebra, typical number of cervical vertebra. But since, due to human variation, they're not always the same. So in the lumbar spine, there's very typically and on average 5 lumbar vertebrae. You'll find this in 90% of the people out there. However, some people have 1 more lumbar vertebra than normal, and some people have 1 less vertebra than normal. Same thing with the thoracic spine. The thoracic spine has 12 vertebrae in it, on average. But not everyone. Someone has 1 more, some people have 1 less. Sometimes there's 1 more thoracic vertebra, but 1 less lumbar. Sometimes there's 1 more lumbar vertebra and 1 less thoracic vertebra. Sacrum has typically roughly 5 fused vertebrae in it. It can vary too. It can have 1 or 2 more or less fused vertebrae in it. And this is all due to human variation. So depending on who you are, you might be one of these people that have an extra vertebra or a missing one. And this is perfectly okay and normal. This is just the normal course of human development and human variation here. It's only a problem if it creates pathology, if it creates pain. It might affect your yoga postures. So if you have an extra or missing vertebra, maybe you can't go as deep into postures, or maybe you can go deeper than a normal person can because of this case. The vertebra of the neck, the cervical vertebra, is interesting. So that doesn't vary. We all have exactly 7 neck vertebrae. In fact, all mammals have exactly 7, including giraffes. And there's another trick question. We have about a minute left on this side. There's another trick question I always like to throw out is, what's the most flexible part of the spine? I think a lot of people want to say the lumbar because that's usually where we get the biggest bend in our main torso. But of course, it's not the lumbar. The most flexible part, usually the most flexible part of our spine is the neck, is the cervical spine. If you think of all the degrees of ranges of motions of our head, the neck is much more flexible than the lumbar. Just some food for thought here. So a couple more breaths here on this side of the twist. So this is the last degree of freedom. We've gone through all six movements, all six motions of the spine here with this last twist. Your next inhale, use the inhale to bring the knees back up to center. Maybe give your knees a nice hug. That was the last yin posture. Before resting pose, maybe we'll end with a little bit of integration with a hip opener. Just because we haven't really worked with the hips. This was really focused on the spine. So we'll try eye of the needle just before we go into resting pose. So with knees bent, draw your left knee in, put your left ankle on your right thigh. If this generates a lot of sensation in your hips, you can just stay here. Otherwise, draw this right leg into your torso. You can clasp your hands behind the right thigh or in front of the right shin. And just pull things in until you're feeling a lot of good oomph here. And then maybe get your breath in on this a little bit. Maybe one more breath here. Squeeze in one last time. Release. We'll switch sides. So now it's the right ankle on the left thigh. Right knee goes out wide. And then you can just stay here. This is enough. Or start bringing things in. Give them a squeeze. This is meant to just kind of release the hips after all that spine work. Might actually feel good on the spine too. And then from here, you can release. And if there's any other kind of wiggling that you would like to do to work out kinks before the final resting posture, do that. And then come into your resting posture. Your final meditation pose, if you will. Can be seated, can be legs up the wall, can be this traditional shavasana pose here. You're just lying on your back. Or maybe there's some other kind of restorative posture that you would like here. Just to end the practice. This is where you cultivate this idea of softening everything. You're softening the whole body. You're also softening the brain and the thoughts. Bring your spine back to neutral as much as you can. So if you feel like you're kind of twisted or kinked, maybe take some time to wiggle and create this nice neutral line. And your neutral line is unique to you here. And that's what we'll end practice is. We'll end practice with trying to notice the spine again. So we're ending practice with spinal awareness. Maybe we'll notice the primary curves of the spine, because those are the parts of the spine that are really rooted into the ground at the moment. So you can really feel the backside of your hips, your sacrum, touching the floor. You can feel the backside of your upper torso here touching the floor. You can feel that pressure on the floor. So those are where your primary curves are. Incidentally, you can also feel the occipital lobe of the back of your skull on the floor, because that's another point. If you're lying on the ground, if you're sitting, then you have to just kind of visualize these points on your spine. Continue to breathe, maybe deepen your breath. Feel the secondary curves, and you feel them because of the lightness. So they're not touching the ground as hard, or they might not be on the ground at all. So you can feel that arch, that light arch in your lumbar spine. And you can feel a tiny little arch in your cervical spine. If it's in the neutral position, it probably won't be lying on the floor. It'll probably be off of the floor because your skull is on the floor. So you're noticing all that while you're just lying here. And this is a way for you to see the back of your spine. You're seeing it by actually feeling the pressure or lack of pressure on the different parts. And this starts to clue you in onto how your neutral spine actually feels here. And this is good to do on a hard floor because the floor doesn't give like a bed cushion does here. So maybe not as comfortable as lying in bed, but you certainly can get a sense of where your spine is at in space here. And it gives you some information on the characteristics of your own spine. And you can maybe even go back to the spinal awareness breathing where you start at your tailbone, and as you inhale, you slowly move your awareness up the spine until the very end of the inhale you reach the crown of your head, and then you slowly move your breath awareness back down the spine on the exhale. So at the end of the exhale, you're back down to the very base of your spine, your tailbone. And then maybe continue this for a few more cycles. And begin to deepen your breath. Bring your thoughts back into the room. You can start to make little motions. You can start to move fingers, move toes, maybe gently rock your head from side to side. You can start moving wrists, hands around. You can move feet around. Maybe you can make little motions in your legs and in your arms. If you're laying on the ground, at some point gently bend your knees and roll over onto one side. When you get there, stay there for a moment to give yourself a big thank you for your practice. But also a big thank you for you, your unique embodiment in the universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. Then when you're ready, gently bring yourself up to seated. Find a comfortable seat. Bring your spine back to neutral. Bring your hands together at heart center and end practice with an Om. So you can either join in or just listen. The inner light in me honors the inner light in you. Namaste.